What makes a monster? Is it the fangs, the scales, the eyes that turn life into cold, dead stone? Or is a monster something else entirely? Something that hides behind a smile, behind a crown, behind the guise of a king? We are told stories of heroes and beasts, of swords and shields, but often, the line that divides the savior from the destroyer is as thin as the edge of a blade. This is not just a story about a boy who killed a Gorgon. This is a story about a son who loved his mother enough to walk into the jaws of death. And a story about the tragedy of a woman who was cursed for being beautiful. This is the legend of Perseus, and the reflection of courage. On the sun-drenched shores of Seriphos, the world seemed deceptively peaceful. The waves kissed the sand with a rhythm as old as time, and the white stone houses gleamed under the Aegean sun. But for Perseus, this island was not a paradise. It was a prison. He was young, his hands were calloused not from war, but from the nets of a fisherman. He had no father to guide him, only the fierce protective love of his mother Danae. But beauty is a dangerous gift in a world ruled by greedy men. King Polydectes, the ruler of this island, did not see Danae as a person. He saw her as a possession, a trophy to be claimed. He saw Perseus not as a subject, but as an obstacle. The tension in the air was heavier than the humid heat of summer. Every time the king looked at his mother, Perseus felt a fire ignite in his chest, a mix of rage and terrifying helplessness. What can a boy with a wooden sword do against a king with an army? The ultimatum was delivered not with a shout, but with a cruel mocking whisper. "Bring me the head of Medusa," the king had said, knowing full well that no mortal had ever returned from her lair. It was a suicide mission. It was a death sentence disguised as a quest for honor. But when Perseus looked into his mother's eyes, filled with fear for him, he knew he had no choice. To stay was to see her dishonored. To leave was to risk death. For a son, the choice was simple. He would rather die a hero than live as a coward. The journey began in silence. Pushing his small boat into the vast ink-black ocean, Perseus felt the crushing weight of his own mortality. The island of Seriphos shrank behind him, a fading beacon of safety. The sea at night is a lonely place. It mirrors the human soul, dark, deep, and full of unseen terrors. For days he drifted, guided only by the stars and the desperate hope that he would see his mother again. He was not a demigod in his mind. He was just a frightened boy, shivering in the cold wind, clutching the handle of a sword he barely knew how to use. But the gods watch. They watch not with kindness but with curiosity. They saw a spark in this boy, not the lust for glory but the purity of his intent. In the heart of a mystical forest, where the trees glowed with the bioluminescence of ancient magic, they descended. Athena, the goddess of wisdom with eyes like storm clouds, and Hermes, the messenger, quicksilver and sharp. They did not offer to fight his battle. That is not the way of the gods. Instead, they offered him tools. Hermes gave him wings for his feet, to outrun the wind, and a sword forged to cut through the hardest scales. But it was Athena's gift that carried the heaviest lesson. She gave him a shield of polished bronze, bright as a mirror. "You must not look at her," Athena had warned, her voice echoing with the weight of prophecy. "To look at the Gorgon is to embrace the end. You must look only at the reflection. See the truth, not the terror." Perseus took the shield, seeing his own face in the metal, young, scared, determined. He realized then that this shield was not just for defense. It was a lens. It was a way to see the world without being destroyed by it. The lair of Medusa lay at the edge of the world, a place where the sun refused to shine. The air here was stale, thick with the smell of dust and decay. As Perseus landed, the silence was deafening. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a graveyard. Scattered across the cavern floor were statues, hundreds of them, warriors with swords raised in eternal strikes, cowering men with hands over their faces, young adventurers who thought they were immortal. The level of detail was haunting. Perseus walked past a statue of a soldier, and in the gray stone, he saw a tear frozen on the man's cheek. These were not decorations. These were lives. Stories cut short. Fathers, sons, brothers. The horror of Medusa was not just that she killed, but that she trapped souls in a prison of stone, leaving them as monuments to her own torment. Then he heard it. The sound was unmistakable, the dry, rhythmic scraping of scales against stone, the hissing of 1,000 whispers. Medusa. She did not roar like a beast. She wept. Her voice was a broken melody of sorrow and rage, echoing through the shadows. Perseus hid behind a pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He raised the shield. In the polished bronze he saw her. She was terrifying, yes. Her hair was a nest of vipers writhing and snapping at the air. Her skin was the color of sickness. But in the reflection, Perseus saw something else. He saw her eyes. They were glowing with an ancient radioactive yellow. But beneath the glow, there was profound loneliness. She had once been human. She had been a priestess, devoted and beautiful, until a curse stripped her of her humanity. She was a monster made, not born. She was a victim of divine cruelty, lashed out at a world that had rejected her. For a moment, Perseus didn't feel hatred. He felt pity. He understood that monsters are often created by pain that has nowhere else to go. But survival is a cruel master. Medusa sensed him. The snakes on her head hissed in unison, a chorus of death. She lunged. The battle was a blur of motion. Stone shattered around him as her gaze turned pillars into dust. Perseus moved with the grace of the winged sandals, flying, dodging, never looking up. His eyes glued to the reflection in the shield. It was a dance of shadows. He was fighting a ghost in a mirror. The moment of truth arrived in a heartbeat. Medusa cornered him, her scream shattering the air, begging him to look at her, to witness her pain, to join her collection of stone. Perseus closed his eyes tight. He let the reflection guide his hand. He didn't strike with malice, he struck with mercy. One clean swing. The silence that followed was absolute. It was over. But from death life finds a way. As the curse lifted from her broken form, a blinding light erupted. From the blood of the Gorgon, Pegasus, the winged horse, soared into the cavern air. Majestic, white as new snow. A creature of pure freedom born from a creature of pure confinement. It was a sign. Even in the darkest places, even from the most tragic ends, beauty can arise. Perseus watched the creature fly, and he understood. He had taken a life to save a life, but he would not let the darkness consume him. The journey back was different. Perseus was no longer the boy who had rode into the night. He carried the head of Medusa, not as a trophy of pride, but as a heavy burden of necessity. He returned to Seriphos as the sun was high in the sky, a stark contrast to the darkness he had left. The palace of King Polydectes was filled with the sound of drunken laughter. The king sat on his throne, arrogant and secure, dragging Danae by the arm, forcing her into a marriage she did not want. The cruelty of men is often worse than the cruelty of monsters. The king mocked her, laughing at the memory of her foolish son who had surely perished. Then the doors burst open. Perseus stood there, silhouetted against the blinding midday light. He looked older. The softness was gone from his face, replaced by a granite resolve. The room fell silent. Polydectes laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He demanded to see the prize, expecting an empty bag or a boy begging for mercy. Perseus looked at the king, then at his mother. He saw the fear in her eyes, and he knew what he had to do. He didn't want to use the head. He didn't want to unleash that power again. But some evils cannot be reasoned with. You asked for the head of Medusa, Perseus said, his voice calm, echoing off the marble walls. Then look upon it. He pulled the head from the sack. He did not look. He turned his face away, shielding his mother. But Polydectes looked. His generals looked. The laughter died in their throats. In a fraction of a second, the arrogance turned to horror, and the horror turned to gray. The skin hardened, the robes turned to rock, the cruel sneers were frozen in eternity. The king became a statue, a monument to his own greed, trapped forever in the moment of his downfall. Perseus dropped the head back into the bag. It was done. The tyranny was over. He ran to his mother, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he was just a boy again, weeping in her arms. The warmth of her embrace was the only reality that mattered. Later, on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Perseus stood alone.
I must do this.
He held the head of Medusa one last time. It was a weapon of mass destruction, a power that could make him a king, a conqueror, a god among men. But he remembered the tear on the stone soldier's cheek. He remembered the sadness in Medusa's eyes. He knew that true power is not the ability to destroy, but the strength to lay down your arms. He threw the head into the abyss. He watched it sink into the crushing depths of the ocean. where it could never hurt anyone again. He looked up. Pegasus was soaring through the clouds, chasing the sunset. Perseus smiled. He had walked into the dark, he had faced the monster, and he had learned the most important lesson of all. We all have monsters to fight, sometimes out in the world, sometimes within ourselves. But it is not the sword that makes the hero. It is the heart that refuses to turn to stone. It is the love that keeps us human, even when the world tries to make us monsters. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, Perseus turned his back on the sea and walked home.